If you're hoping to buy a home in the next 30 to 45 days, but you have not started the pre approval process yet, then this episode is for you. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Closing the Deal. I am one of your hosts, Sam Enright. Sitting across from me, as always, is my co-host, Zach Dickson. And today, guys, we are talking about how long does it actually take to buy a home? So obviously, I know we've kind of covered adjacent, I guess, inside of other episodes. We've, kind of dropped some nuggets on this, but the reason for this episode really is more so we've had a couple of situations that have hit close to home for this one. So we've had a couple of clients in the last couple of weeks who have reached out and are on very, very short timelines, and this is the first that they've even looked into buying a home. And so just wanted to set the proper expectations for everybody when it comes to these things, because it's not something you're taught, and so I can't necessarily blame everybody for waiting till the last minute. But hopefully, this episode will help kind of give an idea of what that timeline actually genuinely looks like. So excited to get into that. Yeah, Zach, how you feeling today?
Oh, cannot complain. Energy levels are high. Feeling good this morning for sure. I think you hit a good nail on the head there with the setting expectations front. Obviously, having the correct expectation before you get started on the journey is just going to set you up for good success versus, some of the situations that we'll outline here in the episode today. Can definitely lead down a path of disappointment, frustration, all of the above negative emotions. So definitely excited to discuss this one, and definitely one that we kind of see more often than we would like to, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, it's not really to any fault of any person in particular. You know, I was talking with, my loan partner about it yesterday, and just like, you think about life right now, right? You click a button on Amazon and you can have a package to you inside of a day, sometimes, no more than typically 2 days. You want food, you can go on DoorDash, click a button, it'll be here in 40 minutes, right? You go to a car dealership, you can literally give your information, walk off the lot that day with a car. And so we are inside of an instant
Gratification.
yes, instant gratification society, where we want the thing that we want and we click a button and it's there. And unfortunately, mortgages, or fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, mortgages have not caught on to that. And there's a reason for that. We're going to kind of break that down today, to talk about really what goes into the backside of it. Again, I know it's things that we've talked about, but really, really want to ingrain this in you guys, because there's a lot of people that reach out and are set up for, get set up for disappointment ultimately, right? Because they did not necessarily take the proper timeline to start exploring this option. So, that is ultimately the overarching goal of this, is to have a really genuine understanding of why it is that the process takes as long as it does, and what that looks like for you and how to actually go about that.
For sure, because ultimately some of those examples that you gave are genuinely just one decision. Like, you have to make one decision and then the answer is right there in front of you, or whatever you want is right there in front of you. And buying a home is the complete opposite. It is a lot of coordinated steps, a lot of decisions to be made in a, orderly fashion over a time period. Can't really just make one decision and have that home the next day, like you mentioned with some of those other examples there. So definitely excited to dive in. And why don't you get us started with the real timeline? What do we get started with?
Yeah. So, I mean, the real timeline, if we look at this in phases, right? So your first phase, and this is kind of, I know on the 90-day plan, we talked about a different phase, but let's break it down in a more practical, just loan sense, right? Because ultimately we would encourage most people that when you want to decide to buy a home, that you actually take a look at your finances, you take a look at these things, and actually dive in, break down budgets, that sort of thing. But let's say that part's already done, right? So let's just focus on, okay, we're going to contact a lender. We're going to actually start this process. We're going to get in touch with a real estate agent, all of that. The budgeting and all that stuff's already done in this sense, right? So your very first phase is going to be the pre-approval phase. And the reality of this phase is that ultimately most lenders these days, if you want a true pre-approval, is actually going to take a little bit longer than you think. Now, I'm not saying there aren't situations where, we have clients who will submit documentation, they're salaried employees, they got assets in a bank account, credit scores are great, boom, we can bust that, pre-approval out in a very short time period, right? 24 hours, we can have them a pre-approval. However, I will say that as time has gone on and I've spent more time in this business, the likelihood of just very clean income and very clean credit and all these things, it's not as common as you would think that it is. So, getting inside of that pre-approval, right? The very first thing, or one of the first two things you're going to look at, is income review and credit analysis, right? So, there are people that, that know that their credit may not be in the best spot and still ultimately wait until their timeline is almost at the very end to start that process. And whether that's, whatever factors go into that for them, right? They don't necessarily want to take the deep dive in there. They don't really want to look at, they don't want to pull the layers back and see what's really going on underneath, because then maybe it confirms what they already have known, right? And so I know sometimes we can operate that way as human beings, basically don't look at it until you absolutely have to, sort of deal. So, inside of that, we've had people that have known that credit's not a strength of theirs and have not necessarily reached out and had those steps. And that's likely because you don't think, a lot of lenders maybe have the reputation of, okay, if you don't have the credit score, go figure it out and come back when you do. And, that's not how every lender out there operates, right? So we spend a great deal of time with our clients actually diving into credit, actually, taking that a step by step and talking about, hey, this is what we see going on. Here's what we could do to potentially, fix that. We have rapid rescore options that we have in house. We have, credit people that we work with, that we could get you out to actually do a full credit repair if needed. So that's not something that we necessarily just glaze over and say, hey, if your credit's not here, obviously go figure it out and then come back when you do. I know we already talked about the story of the guy who was in the high 500s and I helped him get his score up to over 700 in 45 days, right? There's another set of clients that came to me in late December, early November. We worked with them for about a month and a half. They paid some debts down and boom, we got their credit up where it needed to be. So it's not always just a, hey, go figure it out, come back when you do. We actually sit and take the time to actually work with you on those things, if it's something within the realm of what we can actually fix and, kind of help build back up. Obviously, if it's something that's going to need a more formal credit repair process, then we will have that conversation of like, hey, this is something you're going to need to work on for probably 3, 6, 9 months in order to get it back into the position that you do. And you should probably go with a professional who actually works in that field full time. So that's the biggest thing, right? Is if you don't know what's going on with your credit and you're expecting to buy a house in 30 days, that right there is a key red flag indicator in your head that, hey, we got to get something figured out here, because the two don't mix. Now, getting into the income side of it, right? So increasingly, we have seen variable income become more of a thing for clients. And when you have variable income, there is a larger deep dive that we have to do into the income. Most loan guidelines are going to require you to have at least a minimum of 12 months of that variable income before they will consider it. And so what that looks like is, let's say you're somebody who works a job and you're scheduled to get 40 hours a week, but we look at some pay stubs and you have 77 hours one week, and then you have, 72 the other week, and then you have 80, one of the weeks, right? But when we look at that year to date and we look at what your hourly wage times 40 hours a week is, and that year to date does not align up with where that should be at, then we have to start doing a deeper dive into the income to figure out, okay, how much of this income is usable? What can we do to make this work? Because ultimately, if we've determined that you're not working a consistent 40 hours a week, we can't just take your hourly wage times 40 hours and that's the income that we use, right? We have to figure it out. So we either have to average the income over a time period, we have to average hours over a time period. And where this can become a little bit of an issue is if you started a new job anytime in the last 12 months, right? If it's a different job that you switched and moved to, and now you're only been there for 3-4 months and you're working variable hours, that's going to create a little bit of friction inside of this for us to have to dive a little bit deeper into the income. So, a pre-approval can take, 24 hours, but it can also take a week or so. If we have to get with your employer, we have to get more documentation. If we have to do a deep dive into this, ultimately that can take as long as it takes, depending on, hey, we have to communicate with the employer, we have to get this back. And so, that's something that has become increasingly more frequent for what we've been seeing with clients out there. And again, it's not a bad thing. It's not saying, hey, this isn't doable or anything like that. It's just, we have to do a very good job on our end, because I feel like the market has definitely changed over the course of, even when I started in the business, right? When I got started 7-8 years ago, there were clients who were going and viewing houses without pre-approval letters. There were clients who were putting in offers without pre-approval letters and that sort of thing. Those things are far and away less frequent now than they were back then, right? And so the market has ultimately changed. Once you get into a more competitive, a more tight market, once people start to realize, hey, we don't want to necessarily show homes and do all these things for people that we don't know if they can even afford this is even in their price range, if they're pre-approved, if they can even buy a house. I think people have started to say, okay, we need these things taken care of before we're even going to consider that next step, right? So, that's ultimately why we've also changed our process to say, okay, we need to dig a little bit deeper in on these things, because when we send you out shopping for a home, our goal is to say that once you find that home, the back end process is going to be a lot smoother, because we did the work in the forefront to make sure that all of these things are in alignment, right? Credit, income, those major things that can pop up when you go into contract on something. Those are things that we try to eliminate as early as possible to make happen. So, and then there's also the document collection side of it. We have clients that will take 3-4 business days to get documentation in. If that's the case, your pre-approval process is going to take longer, right? That is just reality. We can only work with so much. I can't tell you how many times we've had clients who will input a certain amount of income on their application, and we are far below it or far above it, right? Because sometimes they don't know that it's gross income. So they'll just put what they get in their, their net check, right? They get paid twice a month. Okay. They put whatever they normally net out in their check in there. And then, we are able to use numbers far greater than that. And then we have clients who, say they're working, $3,000 a month in overtime, and it's, they've only been there for 8 months, so like we can't use overtime unless we've had a longer history of that. So it's all these little things, right? So we can't necessarily just say, okay, what is put on this application is exactly what we're going to take at face value. Let's send the pre-approval out, because that ultimately is going to put us in a position where you could go in a contract on a house and we're like, hey guys, this income, we can't even use this income. And, so it's just little things like that. And then obviously you have your strategy involved, right? It's not as simple as just throwing in an application. We take a look at it and say, okay, boom, good. You're good to go, right? We're going to have those conversations. What are your goals? What are you looking to do? How much money do you have to put down on this? What, ultimately, you want to do down payment assistance, or do you want to do 20% down? You want to do 5% down? What loan program is going to best suit you? What areas are you looking to buy in, right? There's a lot of questions that go into that to help us structure the loan properly so that it makes sense for you. So I know that was kind of a long phase there, but obviously this is something I am involved in every single day on the pre-approval side. So I see all of these different things. And so it's one of those things where if starting to buy a home is something you genuinely want to do, please, I urge you to get started on that process as soon as you possibly can, because you're ultimately going to save yourself so much time on the back end. If that's the way, you're going to save yourself disappointment, because if you're renting and your lease is up in 30, 45 days and you have to make a decision and you can't go month to month, and then you have to go re-sign another lease for 6 months, 12 months, you're going to put yourself out a whole nother year, half a year, based on not having that conversation at month, 3, month 4, month 5 before your lease is up, right?
Absolutely. I mean, great information there. That process, that first, phase of things when you get this journey started is very, very detail oriented, and you got to be able to make sure that you're providing the correct details to your professionals to be able to set yourself up for a good situation down the road. Ultimately, again, it just goes back to the prep work, the preparation. I know that we've hammered home this here in 2026, but it is a very, very large key as we start getting into the next phase, the home search. And that is when the competitiveness of the market does dictate this preparation, that does dictate who wins offers based on the preparation. These are things that we've talked about obviously in a previous episode as well, but when you don't do these things, you're going to be setting yourself up for failure when you do get into that phase two. And ultimately that is where I am headed next. And it is the home search. You talked about a couple of clients in there that were looking to buy immediately in 30, 45 days, hadn't even gotten the pre-approval process started. Let's just give an example and say that they are perfect clients. They can have the pre-approval done in 24 hours and they're ready to go, get started on that home search immediately after deciding that they want to buy the home. That's all good and well, but ultimately this phase two is not really within your control. Generally speaking, you really can't schedule when the right home is going to appear for you. It could be 1 week, it could be 2 months, it could be 1 year. We've had clients pretty much all across the spectrum. I've seen homes. I've seen one home with a client who put an offer in and had the home accepted. I've seen 20 different homes with a client and had multiple offers put in. And finally, on that 20th home, they finally had that offer accepted. And so ultimately, when it comes to the home search and with the market around you, that's not really something that is in your control. Whereas some of this pre-approval stuff is, you can control how quickly you get these documents in. Ultimately, you can control your income per se. You can control your credit per se as well. Those are the things that are within your control. You can't really control not seeing a house that you're interested in on the market. You have that pre-approval letter after 24 hours. You get on the MLS and check out the properties that I've set up for you on a search, and you don't like anything. And then a day goes by and you don't like anything there. And now a week goes by and you don't like anything there, and you haven't seen any properties. And now we're a week into the process that you needed to be done in 30 days, 45 days. And it's more than likely not going to happen at that point. And so I think really you just have to have, again, clarity on what is going on in each of these phases. You have to be aware of the market conditions as a whole around you to be able to set yourself up for success and kind of, in that prep work as well. Know that more than likely, just based on market conditions and things around you, that it's not going to happen in that time frame. It's going to happen in the time frame that works best for you, not the one that you want to happen. Ultimately it's just going to be able to, it's kind of going to fall into your lap per se. That's the best way I can describe it when the right home comes about. And and ultimately, like I mentioned on the previous episode as well, you can't control what other people are doing as well. You can't control how much they can offer. You can't control what they're going to offer, the terms that they're going to offer. And those are things that, go into this phase two that may delay the timeline, may take a little bit more time than you ultimately would like it to. And so that's really just what I wanted to hammer home in this phase two. It's a very, very variable process, can change on a lot of different things based on, market conditions and your wants and needs as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part, because we do have a lot of clients, I'm sure you see it as well. We have clients that, actively are looking on Zillow, looking on Realtor, maybe they're just kind of browsing and then they see this perfect house, this absolutely perfect house jump up. And then it becomes this process of like, okay, we have to basically sprint to the finish line here. Like we have, this amount of time and we got to get it in. And we've not even had those conversations. Like this house is going live on Friday. This is Thursday that I'm seeing it. We need to get we need to submit an application and we need to get pre-approved. We need to be able to go see the house tomorrow. We need to be able to get an offer in tomorrow because it's going to be competitive, and all of these different things. Right. And so ultimately, all you're doing in this situation is adding more pressure to yourself, adding more layers to it than maybe necessarily need to be. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be done that way. But again, this is, ultimately why we're trying to put this episode out there and have this conversation, is because that might work in other areas of our lives right now. When you see something on Amazon or you see something that you want to buy online and you're like, I want this right now, boom, okay, cool, you can order it and it will be there, right? That is not the way that home search works. And ultimately why you wouldn't really want it to work that way either, right? Because with Amazon, you can get the item and then you can decide to send it back if it's not up to standard, up to par with what you want, right? I don't really need this anymore. Okay, cool. You can return that thing. You go to a store, you buy it, you can go and return it. With a home, if you go through this process and you make that purchase, undoing that is going to be a lot harder than just hitting a return button and just saying, okay, cool, we're done. You know what I mean? There's a lot of more factors into relisting a house and getting it back on the market and then all of these different things. And so you want to make sure that you are solid in that decision and that this is something that you genuinely want. Because again, this is, for 99% of people, this is going to be the largest purchase that you will ever make in your entire life. If you're looking at $200,000, $300,000 houses, that's a lot of money to go in debt on and not be steadfast in that decision, right? To not be solidified in what you are doing. So, and I think that, the shorter time period that you make that decision, the higher percent chance you have of getting yourself into a position that will lead to regret, right? I think that's just natural amongst people in general. Some of the most emotional decisions that I've made in my life have led me to sit back and be like, did I really need to do that? Was that really a smart decision? No, it wasn't. But my emotions would not clouded ultimately my judgment in that moment, right? So, that's another side of it that we didn't really discuss is, the more and more that you put the pressure on being done 30, 45 days, like there's going to be added layers of pressure, stress, and then ultimately potentially decisions made that maybe were not the best decisions. You see something come up in a home inspection that maybe is a red flag, but you're just so invested in this and, hey, we have to do this in 30 days. Like I have to be out, that you ignore these things. You say, it is what it is. And then, you get in the house and then that thing goes wrong that you knew could go wrong. You didn't ask for, and now you're in a position where, maybe the timeline shrunk and it's broken down or whatever in a shorter time period than originally was given. And now, you're kind of just sitting around like, what do I do about that? And what do you do about it? You're on the hook for it. It's your responsibility now. You know what I mean? There's no question about, what do you do about it? You got to take care of it. So that's just my 2 cents on that home search side of it as well.
For sure. And I mean, just, generally speaking, emotional decisions made on a whim usually aren't the best decisions. As you mentioned, they're going to come with regret, typically speaking. It's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately, or fortunately. I would just say to do your due diligence before you make decisions, especially one that is such a large financial purchase as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that brings us to our last phase here of what this looks like. And I mean, this phase alone will tell you that 30, 45 days is not typically enough to buy a whole house, because if you're reaching out on day 30 and you're not pre-approved, you don't have a house, you're not in contract, typically, guys, a home is going to take at least 30 days to purchase, right? So, are there situations where it's done faster? Absolutely. But most normal contracts are going to be written up for a 30-day time period. So if that's something you're looking to do, you are already behind the 8 ball if you have waited until day 30 in order to get pre-approved, go put an offer in on a home and get into contract, because that timeline is going to take that amount of time. Reason for that, you have a lot of different things, right? We've talked about this. This is a very layered process. there's a lot of things that go into it, and you need one step to hit and then the next step to hit, and everything to kind of fall into line, right? So when you go in a contract, you're going to start with that inspection phase. So you're going to get an inspector out there. They're going to tell you all the nuts, bolts, bones of the house, give you an overview of everything that you're looking at. And so that's going to be step one, right? You're going to want a positive inspection. You're going to want things to be in order on that house. If you have some major red flags, that's going to be a problem for most people, right? And so that's going to lead to either renegotiation, or it's going to lead to different things that, again, take time. So if there's repairs that need to be done, now you are taking what would be an otherwise perfect situation. You would need it to run perfectly to get it done in 30 days. And now you've added a layer to it of, oh, well, there was some things that needed to be taken care of on the inspection. So we need to get these repairs done. Well, that ultimately is going to lead to a delay in the appraisal, right? Because if we know that there's repairs that need to be done on the house, we're not just going to send an appraiser out there to call out said repairs that we already know need to be done. That's ultimately a wasted trip, because he's going to have to go back out to verify those have been done. So let's just say it takes 3-4 days for those repairs to be done. Now you're 3 or 4 days behind of ordering the appraisal. Appraisal is going to take anywhere between 7 to 10 days to come back. And then ultimately when the appraisal comes back, you want to make sure that there's nothing on the appraisal side that was called out, no repairs on that side. So, and then you have title work, right? Title work's going to take anywhere from 7 to 14 days as well to come back. You're going to want clean title. You're going to want to make sure things don't pop up. I can't tell you how many times especially like in the last couple of years, we've gone in, we've done transactions, we've gotten halfway through, and the legal description's been red stamped by the county, and a new boundary survey has to be done, and a new legal description has to be written. If that happens, you have to get a survey company to go out. They have to resurvey the land. They have to rewrite a new legal description that has to be sent through the county, and now that has to be approved in order for all of that to happen. And let me tell you, I have not seen that process take less than 3 weeks ever. So now you've taken 3 weeks of that 30 days, and that's already chewed up by having to get, a new boundary survey for a new legal description. And, those sort of things do happen. And so there's a lot of variables, right? I guess I'm saying all of this to say there are so many variables that come into play when you're buying a home that people don't think about. Then you have underwrite. Then you have the loan side of things, right? You have the underwriting. You have your conditions. So the underwriter is going to review all the documentation, and if this is something that, hey, we pushed through in a day or two because we were on the fast track to get a pre-approval out to get this done as quickly as possible. Let's just be honest. We're not perfect. We're all human beings. How many things do you think maybe go missed when we're trying to cramp maybe a multiple day process in the pre-approval into a 1 day process because we're trying to get this offer in and we're trying to get this house, right? We're trying to put you guys in the best position that we can, but there's a balancing act there, because ultimately, right, clients, when you're in that mode and you really, really want something, right, there's going to be a little bit of like, hey, I need this. And so, we feel a little bit of pressure on our side to step up, perform to get where we need to be in that timeline. And sometimes things will go missed if that happens. And so maybe that comes up in underwriting, maybe that comes up on the condition list, and it's like, oh gosh, we missed this, now we have to take care of it. And so, that could potentially add another couple of days. So I say all that to just say there's a lot of things that go into this process that people don't know, right? They don't know. Unless you've gone through it, you don't necessarily understand. And ultimately, we shield a lot of our clients, even agents, we shield a lot of them from what actually goes on the mortgage lending side of it, because unless you've worked in it for a day and understand like the complexity of what goes on the back end, sometimes it can just be a lot. And obviously for us, it's okay, this is routine, this is normal, but then when you start to have these conversations with people and tell them what's going on, they're like, I just don't understand this business. I remember we had an agent that came and worked on one of our teams. She was a realtor and then came to the mortgage side of it, and she was just blown away by the difference in what happens in a contract period on a lender side versus what happens on a real estate agent side. And it's just like, it is a lot. So you got to be prepared for that. And so ultimately, that's why we're trying to have these open lines of communication, open ends conversations to let you know, hey, this is not just, hey, just push a button, submit it through, underwriter looks at it, good, okay, appraisal comes in, title work comes in, boom, we're done in 14 days, let's just move on and call it a day, you got your house, right? Are there some transactions that could work out that way? Absolutely. But is that the large majority of them? No.
For sure. And ultimately, I mean, you have a scenario or an example where they got their pre-approval letter 24 hours in. They found a home immediately that they liked. They had the offer accepted. Now you have to, like you mentioned, have to be perfect in that phase 3. You have to be perfect. Nothing can go wrong in that phase 3 between all of these moving parts to ultimately get to that minimum like 30-day time frame. Like that is really a genuine minimum once you get into contracts. It can go quicker, obviously, but again, there's just so many variables, so many moving parts that is just not a very likely outcome for the scenario at hand. It's very, very unlikely. So putting kind of all eggs into one basket that is going to go how you think it's going to go, and you are going to be perfect throughout this entire process, ultimately, again, is just going to set you up for failure. And it's going to, again, allow you to make emotional decisions in this time period too. If you get that inspection report back and there's things on it and you know that you have to be done in 30 days, you may make emotional decisions based on those things and accept things that you otherwise wouldn't, and otherwise, would start to negotiate on. And it's just when you kind of put a deadline on things as a whole, it just kind of backs you into a corner. And that's not really a scenario that you want to be in as a home buyer in this journey.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, just to reframe it for people, when you engage in a mortgage transaction, when you engage in a home contract, when you're going to purchase, I know, we talked about a couple of things in there. It can feel very simple to think that, okay, this is just the lender, right? And that is probably a common assumption, but just like, Zach talked about, being perfect, you have to understand there's at least 3 third-party people involved in this transaction outside of your real estate agent and outside of your mortgage lender, right? So you're going to have a home inspector, right? Third-party person that's going to come in and view the home and tell you all the nuts and bolts of everything. You're going to have a third-party appraiser who's going to be, yes, contracted through through the lender. We are going to send that order out on a round robin schedule and get it to an appraiser that works locally in the county. However, that is still going to be a third party, not affiliated with anybody in the transaction. They're going to come in, they're going to give an evaluation of the property. And then you also have title company. Again, another third party person here that is going to come in. They're going to do title work. And so, I have a lot of clients. We have clients who ask us, are we going to be able to close this on time? Do you see anything that's going to jump up? Can you guarantee that we're going to close? No, I will never use the words guarantee, because there are third-party people involved in this that I have no clue what's going to come back. I don't order title. I don't review title work. I don't review everything that goes into that side of things. I'm not an appraiser. I don't go out, find comps, decide what house, what the value is. I don't decide, hey, does this thing need, repairs? That is not my job. And so for me to sit and guarantee and say, hey, this is going to go swimmingly, we are going to absolutely blow this through and we're going to get this done in, 25 days for you so you can meet your deadline. Like, I would be setting myself up for failure and you up for failure in that instance if I made those promises or said that those things were going to happen, because ultimately we don't know. Just like the example with, the title being red stamped and needing a new legal description, right? Those are things that until you order the title and they do the search, nobody's going to know that, right? And so it's one of those things where you just have to be prepared for everything that kind of comes along with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, brother.
We did want to talk about, obviously, I know we kind of already talked about it inside there, but what happens when you do decide to rush it, right? What are some things that you can expect? Well, I think we already hit on it. First and foremost is it's going to be increased stress, and it's going to be increased stress for everybody across the board, right? It's going to be your agent. It's going to be your lender. It's going to be you. You're going to feel an immense amount of stress. If you have created this deadline in your head of we need to be done by this date, you're going to start to feel that pressure as that date starts to creep closer and closer and closer and closer. Normally, this is going to lead to sloppy documentation, or it's going to lead to delay in documentation, right? If that's something where, you are wanting to move as fast as possible, but you take 3 to 4 days to get your documents over to your lender, those two things, don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, right? So, and we see that more than you would probably think that we do. And then obviously, if it takes 3 to 4 days for the documentation to come over and maybe it's not all there, and we try to do what we can with it, but we're, feeling this pressure of like, hey, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go, you know, there will be times where maybe things are missed, or we slip up, and that's something that also has to be taken into consideration. And then obviously we already talked about it, but pressure based decisions can often lead to bad decisions, right? Can lead to highly emotional decisions, can lead to putting yourself in a position where you know things cannot be undone. And that's something to be in consideration as well, especially for this. This is unlike anything else that you will ever purchase in your entire life. That's just reality. This buying a home is not, it's not necessary. It can be an easy process if done the right way. It can be relatively stress-free if done the right way. But I mean, I talk to a lot of clients every single day, and a lot of times, they're still feeling stressed. They're still feeling that pressure ultimately, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, you've not gone through the process before. There's always going to be those emotions with it. And so why compound that by trying to cram everything into a short time period, right? If you know that buying a home is automatically going to create a pressure, a little bit of stress environment for you just because of the nature of what buying a home means, why would you try to cram that into the smallest timeline possible and then amp that pressure times 5, right? Because that's ultimately what happens. So that's why I would avoid rushing it at all costs.
So one thing I really wanted to just touch on as well is why people kind of undervalue this timeline as a whole, and it really goes back to a conversation that we had at the beginning of the episode. And social media is a big factor as to why people are thinking that it can just go so easily, so swimmingly as a whole. Ultimately, you see somebody post that picture at closing that they just closed on their new house, and that's really all of the process that you see. You don't see them posting, stories of them walking through all the homes over the last 3 months. You don't see the posts of, oh, we just had our offer declined. You don't see those things. You don't see, troubles with the back end process of the, contract itself. People don't post those things. People post the good, when we finally get closed, the closing at the closing table. And that's all well and good, but ultimately it does lead to a little bit of misexpectations, I would say, when you only see kind of that. And really, it also applies to some of the things we see on our TV. HGTV, when you watch a flipper show, when you see the property beforehand, you see it after, you don't get to really see all of the details. They show you what they want you to see. And ultimately that is, the good parts. They don't really want you to see the bad parts, and they don't really go into in detail as to how they fix the bad parts, if they do present those to you at all. And so I would say it just kind of goes back to the conversation that we've had at the beginning of the episode of, there is just so many external factors that you can see on, in our media, in all in our life as a whole. That you don't see all parts of the story when things are posted online or on a TV show. And ultimately it can set up the wrong expectations when you're not seeing the process start to finish, A to Z, all of the above details as a whole. And again, like you mentioned, people compare it to the car loan situation. You walk into a car dealership and you tell them how much you make, and you can literally walk out of the dealership with a car that same day. People like to compare those two because they are two relatively big purchases that individuals make on a financial basis in their lifetime. And while they are similar, they're not at the same time, because a home is 10 times what a car would be. in terms of financial worth. And so I think it just goes back to, again, managing your expectations and setting the proper expectations and knowing that you're not seeing the full story when you see something posted online or on a TV show.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, man. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, guys, starting early doesn't mean that you're committing. Just getting that process started is going to help provide clarity for you throughout it. So, getting a pre-approval doesn't mean that you have to go put an offer in on a house tomorrow. Doesn't mean you have to do it next week, but having that conversation, or at least just having your credit reviewed, having the income reviewed, having a an in-depth conversation about where you currently stand, what that looks like, is going to help guide you as to where the next steps are. And so that's vitally important. And obviously, guys, we did want to take a moment here and just, I mean, I kind of like lost track of time throughout this podcast. You got like really kind of passionate in there. So, because obviously this is something that hits home for me because I do see it a lot, and I feel like it does create a lot of frustrations. It does create a lot of pressure, and it can make this, what is supposed to be otherwise a very obviously exciting and happy journey for you, it can create it into almost a beast or a monster that is, it can be challenging, right? To kind of deal with. And so, I feel for a lot of clients when they go through these things and, they have those struggles because of that timeline side of things. So, I say all that to say, I want to reassure you that most people don't know these things, right? Most people don't understand how the backside of a loan process works. Most people don't understand, what actually going out, viewing homes, putting themselves in that position, what that actually looks like, and the timeline that's involved with that. We can obviously, save the chat of why we believe that's the case, but ultimately, these are things that are not taught to us. You're not taught this growing up in school. You're not taught this when you go through college. You're not taught anything in an education form on what this process looks like. So for most people, the very first indication that they're going to have of this is the very first time they pick up the phone and call a lender and talk to them about, hey, I want to get pre-approved for my house. What does that look like? And so that is something that is not, it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault that you don't know. But that's why ultimately, having this information and putting it out there for people is vitally important for us, is so that we can help bridge that gap of what is lacking in the marketplace out there of understanding and clarity on what these processes actually look like for you. So, don't beat yourself up. Obviously, if this is something that's new to you that you don't know, or if maybe you bought a house and we're talking about you and this is this was how your process went, again, ultimately it's not personal. It's just really more so just, hey, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're seeing, and this is how we believe that you could help change that for yourself and put yourself in a different position. So just something to keep in mind there. It is something that is not taught. So
Yeah, great points there, brother. Great points, because again, it just becomes all in all more manageable once you do understand it. It just, once you kind of get a grasp and understand what goes on, you'll realize that a 30 to 45 day time frame from start to finish, from the very beginning to the very end, is not really that feasible. And it just makes more sense once you understand those things, for sure.
yeah.
So guys, yeah, ultimately just kind of wrapping up today's episode. Ultimately, again, it buying a home is very, very time invasive. Like we mentioned already in the episode today, there is a lot of variables that go in to buying a home, and ultimately it matters, having this having this process happen, ultimately getting to the finish line of closing day, getting those keys in your hand, it matters. That is a really, really enjoyable process, and really enjoyable, finish to the process ultimately, when you get there. And so having those, time stamps, time invasiveness throughout the process, having all of those variables happen and happen well, it will be so rewarding and so satisfactory when you get to that end of the period, and you have those keys in your hand. And so ultimately, the earlier that you get started, like you mentioned, it's the smoother it will go for you. The better you'll be able to adapt to some of those variables that happen throughout the process. The earlier that you get started, the more prepared that you are when you get started as a whole.
Yeah, for sure, guys. I mean, it doesn't hurt to reach out at any point in time, right? If you're working with, I mean, I don't know many out there that would not help you in that beginning stage, right? So, I know that that's probably one of the things is, maybe people had a bad experience with somebody with a certain company or whatnot, and you know they made them feel bad about where they were starting at on their journey, and hey, go figure these things out and then come back when you do. Obviously, getting yourself linked up with a proper, with good professionals. A lot of people in this business don't do that sort of stuff, at least not from my experience. Maybe I'm closed off to it because ultimately that's not what we do, and maybe there are people that operate out there like that, but we have never once deterred a client from coming to us and having that initial conversation. If they have some credit things that we need to work on, we're always investing that time, spending the time talking with them about that, figuring out how we can help. If they have some income things, hey, we need a little bit more time on the job. Hey, we need this. We are always open and having those conversations with them. So don't be afraid. Don't, feel like you can't reach out until you have everything figured out. That is what ultimately a good lender, a good professional is for, is to help guide you along that journey, to help you along with it, and be your teammate, and help you get to that ultimate goal of buying a home.
Absolutely, guys. Well, hopefully, you guys found some enjoyment, some value in today's episode. Again, we release an episode every Friday afternoon, 12 p.m. on all of the platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, video form on YouTube. If you know of anybody or you yourself are interested in getting started on the home buying journey, feel free to check us out and send us along. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And again, thanks guys for tuning into today's episode, and we will see you guys on the next one.
See you guys.